My name is Maggie. I'd been solely focused on my work without any romantic entanglements until the age of 28. Or rather, I realized that I'd become 28 years old without even noticing due to the overwhelming busyness. Some of my junior colleagues started getting married as early as 24 or 25, and deep down, I felt a sense of urgency. I wonder if I'm going to spend the rest of my life at this company. Sure, there are senior colleagues who are older and far more experienced than me, and I can't help but admire them for their impressive professional skills. But it's also true that there's a part of me that strongly believes that I don't want to remain single forever. That's when I met George. George is kind and always prioritizes the places I want to go and the things I want to do during our dates. Having never experienced such kindness from a man before, I was swept off my feet and gladly accepted his proposal.
Everyone had a good time at our wedding, huh?
Yeah, I managed to get married while I was still in my 20s.
What? You were worrying about that?
George smiled with his usual calm expression. Come on, I was quite worried.
I see. It's tough for women. Men can get married in their 40s and nobody says anything.
Indeed, it seems like only women are worried about age. Speaking of women, my father-in-law has a calm personality like George, but my mother-in-law is unexpectedly assertive and strong-willed. We don't have plans to live with them, and we'd probably only go visit them for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but I could tell she wasn't particularly fond of me. I plan to continue working and maintain a dual-income household even after getting married, but it appears she has reservations about that. My income is slightly higher than George's. He candidly mentioned it to his mother, who then started pushing her old-fashioned values onto me, saying things like,
"A woman should focus on the household and support her husband. And men have pride. It's not good for you to work so aggressively."
But in this uncertain time when layoffs and cost-cutting measures can happen, I feel the need to save up at least until we have children. George agrees with me on this, but in front of his assertive mother, he's usually overwhelmed. I should probably avoid unnecessary interactions with my mother-in-law, I thought to myself.
So, which travel agency are we going with?
George's voice caught me off guard. A wedding is a major event in life, but there's another important event that remains, our honeymoon. I can't decide. When it comes to a trip to Europe, different agencies offer various plans. I want to go to this place, but I'm also interested in this agency's French wine tasting tour. I pointed to various spots on a brochure marked with Post-its. I've always had a longing for Europe. Stained glass windows in churches, stylish cafes, and historic towns. An opportunity like this is probably a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
So many choices. You can decide whichever one you want.
George, as usual, muttered in a relaxed tone. Okay, I need to make a serious decision. We've been saving up for our future and our children, but we're planning to splurge a bit on this trip. Our honeymoon is probably the only time we can take off from work for so long. Can I sleep on it and decide tomorrow?
Sure. It's not often we can go on an overseas trip.
George, wearing a smile, made his way to the kitchen to enjoy a cup of coffee. Opportunities to go abroad or on vacations are rare, but above all, a honeymoon is an event that happens only once in a lifetime. I want to create unforgettable memories with George, just the two of us. That's why I didn't want to make a decision I might regret later. Even during work, I found myself constantly daydreaming about our trip whenever I had a spare moment. I did refrain from opening travel magazines except during my breaks, of course. Still haven't decided? Yeah, I was so engrossed that I didn't notice my colleague's presence until she spoke up. Hey, you better hurry up and eat before lunch break ends. Oh, right. It's already this late. Don't most European tours usually have predetermined routes? You know, visiting famous tourist spots in Italy and Rome. That's completely wrong. And Rome is in Italy. My colleague laughed and gave me a teasing look. Must be tough being a happy girl in love. Requesting time off is a whole process, and so I need to choose a travel agency soon. You're quite the contemplative lady, aren't you? I didn't pay much attention to my colleagues' teasing at the time. I was too caught up in planning this milestone in my life.
Make sure you do your job responsibly, too, will you? I'm giving you the time off, after all,
my boss said, as if seeing right through me. I'm sorry. I wondered if he noticed that I'd been distracted lately. I need to pull myself together. I opened a file on my computer and started working. I need to focus on my job. I've decided to go with this travel agency's tour. Sure, it's great to hear you found a tour that you like. I must have spent over a month, maybe close to 2 months trying to decide. I wonder if there are really people who agonize over a trip for such a long time. I must have caused a lot of trouble for the travel agency. I'm sorry for all the trouble I've been making, a bunch of inquiries, even about the tour details. The female staff at the travel agency gave me a warm smile. You two are going on your honeymoon, right? Yes. It's normal to take your time thinking about your honeymoon. It's a once-in-a-lifetime journey. We've even had a client who spent 6 months planning their trip alongside their wedding. I was genuinely surprised at the mention of 6 months. Is that so? Despite my murmuring, she maintained her smile. An overseas trip is different from a domestic one. There's a sense of something special. Our job is to provide a trip that will be a wonderful memory for our clients. I felt relieved to hear those words. I was immensely grateful to our wedding planner for their assistance during the wedding, and as I realized that various people were supporting us like this, my anxieties about our trip naturally started to fade away. Now I can focus on work without worry. I'm sure my boss will be relieved as well. When George came home in the evening, I gave him the news. I'm home. I've decided on our travel plan. We're going with this travel agency. George replied in a relaxed manner to my childlike excitement. That's good. I'm glad you found a good one. I was a bit taken aback, but after all, I was the one who had always longed for a trip to Europe. Perhaps this is what travel means to George. Hey, are you excited about our honeymoon? Feeling insecure, I found myself asking him. Surprised, he opened his eyes wide and replied, Of course, with you, I'm certain our trip will be great. We should inform our parents later, too. We spent the evening discussing our trip in detail. Sorry for the worry. We've finally decided on our honeymoon destination. I was so happy that I could hear it in my voice, even without realizing it. My boss, sensing my excitement, said with a relieved expression, Oh, good. I'm counting on you until the trip then. He also handed me some extra paperwork. I didn't even mind the extra work. I was that excited. With both of us working, the timing for us to take the 12 days off needed for a trip to Europe was limited. Because of that, we managed to set the schedule quickly. Guess what, Mom? I couldn't contain my happiness and immediately called my mother when I got home to tell her about the trip. That sounds wonderful. I'm looking forward to the authentic European souvenirs. Something authentic, huh? Maybe I'll look for something stylish, accessories or something. My mother seemed ready to happily send me off on my trip. All I had to do was pack. I've always loved packing for trips. I should also check the weather of the places we're going. Why does preparation for something fun proceed so smoothly? Unlike me, who's impatient, George, with his relaxed personality, seems to take his time with his travel preparations. A week before our trip, both of us had finished packing. Hey, can we buy a new suitcase? I was taken aback by George's sudden question. Suitcase? What's wrong with the one we have? Wait, are we going to repack everything? In response to my rapid-fire questions, George murmured, Well, not quite.
I was thinking of preparing an additional new suitcase.
It's true that the suitcase we have is of medium size and there's not much space left once we pack 2 people's changes of clothes and other necessary items, including a folding umbrella for the trip. We should have enough space to fit souvenirs for our parents and work colleagues, but if I come across a lovely antique or something, I might end up wanting to buy it. That might be a good idea. We could use one more. When we have to carry them, you and I can each hold one.
Yeah, thank you.
I was genuinely happy that George showed interest, as he rarely voiced his opinions during our wedding planning or previous trips. And then it was the day before our honeymoon. I felt my heart race with excitement as I realized that tomorrow was finally the day of departure. What if I can't sleep tonight? But it would be a shame to feel sleepy during the trip. While I was preoccupied with such thoughts, I heard the doorknob turn.
I'm home.
Hey, I'm worried I won't be able to sleep tonight because I'm so excited. George? George, with a solemn look on his face, started to speak. What could he want to talk about the day before our trip? There should be no issues with our passports or documents. What's up? He began speaking.
About my parents,
Then a shocking phrase slipped out of his mouth.
I was planning to ask you to take care of my parents' plane tickets, but I forgot. Do you think it's still possible to make an arrangement?
For a moment, I was unable to comprehend what George was saying. Wait, what are you talking about? When I asked, he explained.
I told my parents about the trip after everything on the itinerary was finalized, but they got upset, saying that it's normal for the groom's parents to tag along. By any chance, have you already purchased their tickets?
I felt my blood start to boil at the sudden and unexpected conversation. What are you talking about? A honeymoon is supposed to be for the couple, isn't it? It's absurd for parents to come along.
But my parents were overjoyed when I told them it was a trip to Europe.
But just because they're happy, we had just gotten married and this was supposed to be a special trip for us. Does George think of it as a regular family trip? Then suddenly the doorbell rang. Without making eye contact, I glanced at the intercom screen and saw George's parents. Contrary to my shock, George casually responded through the intercom.
I'll open it now.
And quickly let them into the living room. Sorry to barge in like this. In my mother-in-law's hand was a bag stuffed full of luggage. Mother-in-law? Taking advantage of my stunned silence, my mother-in-law kept talking. A Boston bag might not be suitable for a flight. We heard you guys prepared a suitcase for us. The suitcase was for them? I felt a sense of weakness wash over me. As I looked at George, he had an expression as if this was all to be expected. I don't want to argue with my in-laws, but I couldn't back down on this matter either. After all, we had spent so much time planning this honeymoon. Plus, there's no way we could get additional tickets at this point, and I verified online that the tour bookings are already completely booked. This is our honeymoon, you know. But my mother-in-law answered in a very matter-of-fact manner. So what? George wasn't taken aback either. My father-in-law was standing behind my mother-in-law holding a huge amount of luggage. A honeymoon is usually just for the couple. In response to this, my mother-in-law replied, Didn't you come to marry into this family? It's only natural that a wife serve her husband's family, isn't it? I understand if it's a family trip, I would gladly go on the trip with the two of you, but a honeymoon is different. Honeymoons and family trips are the same thing. Then how was it when you went on your honeymoon? I was gradually getting irritated, but my mother-in-law, with a triumphant look on her face, responded, At that time, my mother-in-law had a bad leg. It's a daughter-in-law's duty not to push her too hard, isn't it? So you didn't take your mother-in-law on your honeymoon, did you? My mother-in-law was clearly displeased. I knew this would happen the moment I decided to stand my ground. What a difficult girl. We packed with excitement for our trip to Europe, you know. Excitement for our trip to Europe. Just hearing those words made all the struggles and joys I had experienced rush through me, and I couldn't help but feel tears welling up.
Hey, Maggie, isn't it okay if they come?
I heard George's voice coming from beside me.
The more the merrier. If tomorrow doesn't work out, we can cancel and look for a place for the 4 of us.
Huh? As I looked back in astonishment, my mother-in-law joined in with a mix of laughter.
That's right. Oh, I have an idea. How about changing it to a trip to Paris? I want to brag about it to my friends.
Her words even made me feel dizzy. I'm holding back because I have my own pride, but to be honest, I feel like bursting into tears right now. Before I knew it, as if weighed down by my mother-in-law's pressure, I found myself sitting on the floor. Then, from above my head came a totally unexpected sentence. It was from George.
I had no idea you hated my parents so much.
Huh? Looking up, I saw him looking down at me with a stunned face. My mother-in-law also chimed in.
That's right. It's terrible.
I couldn't stand their voices anymore, and I finally screamed hysterically. Why am I being treated like the bad one? It's our honeymoon, for heaven's sake. Why are you ruining such an important trip? George showed no sympathy for my outcry. Of course, he didn't seem to care either.
You've been acting strangely lately.
Huh?
Every time you open your mouth, it's all about our honeymoon. You're not being rational.
George said this coldly.
Mom, Dad, sorry. Could you go home today? You can leave your stuff here.
While saying this, he took his parents to the front door. At the front door, my mother-in-law was making a fuss, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. When he came back after a while, he spoke.
Let's cancel our trip for now. Take a moment to think rationally.
I no longer had the energy to respond to those words. At the same time, I noticed that my feelings for my husband were quickly cooling down. He cared more about his parents than about me. I couldn't imagine continuing as a family with him, facing the challenges of life together, knowing that my mother-in-law will always intervene and yet my husband won't stand up for me. I don't see any happiness in sight. I finally managed to call the travel agency just before closing time. I couldn't possibly enjoy going abroad in this state. The staff who helped me when I made up my mind answered the phone, asking several times if I really wanted to cancel. I clearly communicated my intent to cancel. She seemed to sense various things from the sound of my downcast voice. She briefly explained the necessary points, such as the cancellation fees. I no longer had any feelings of disappointment. It was purely procedural matter. Then, several days passed. During the next few days, there was no conversation between George and me. Our last conversation ended with George saying,
"We'll resume the conversation when you've had a chance to reconsider."
But I don't think I did anything wrong. Neither of us apologized or tried to continue the conversation. It was just before dinner when my husband suddenly put a divorce document on the table.
"I'm taking my whole family on this trip. If you don't like it, we're getting a divorce."
George said it with a frustrated attitude. Strangely enough, I accepted this as George's answer without much hesitation. I responded right away. "Understood. We'll get divorced."
"What?"
The one who was surprised was George.
"Are you serious? Divorcing over just a trip?"
"You're the one who brought the divorce papers." I occasionally glanced up at George's face as I carefully filled out the divorce papers, making sure there were no mistakes. People might think it's just over a honeymoon, but this man doesn't cherish what's important to me. He won't protect me when it matters. Could I spend my life with such a man? He should go on the trip with his parents if he wants to. I don't need a bleak future. George, unable to back down now, also filled out the form with shaking hands. "I'll bring this to the family court tomorrow." I said this as I took the divorce papers from George's hands. A tiny voice saying, "Oh," slipped from George. He may actually be regretting this. But I've made up my mind. This is how our divorce was finalized. Of course, my parents were surprised when I told them about the divorce. My mom suggested that I reconsider, but when I told her about the honeymoon and my former in-laws, she seemed dumbfounded and said cheerfully, "It's a good thing you cut ties with that weird family." I do regret that I caused trouble for my parents and our wedding guests. My colleague who used to tease me as the troubled maiden seemed a bit uncomfortable for a while, but when I said it was the right choice to break up with a grown man who's still dependent on his mother, she seemed to get back to her usual self. On the other hand, it seems that George vented about me being heartless to his colleagues at work. He intended to highlight my lack of common sense, but instead his own absurdity was exposed and quickly spread within his company. He seemed to receive a lot of criticism from his female colleagues in particular, and apparently became known as a mama's boy. He himself was shocked by the gap between societal norms and his family's way of thinking, which led him to make a series of significant mistakes at work. George, who was previously regarded as a laid-back employee, has now transformed into an incompetent and irrational employee. According to a mutual friend, it seems he is going to be transferred to a small branch office in Nebraska. But the situation there is quite severe, and it's obvious that he, who was sheltered and raised by his mother, will eventually quit. By the way, since he suggested the cancellation of our trip, of course I had him pay the cancellation fee in full. I've dealt with a lot, but I'm still a bit hurt. When I let out a sigh without thinking, I made eye contact with a senior colleague passing by. I was taken aback, but she looked at me and said, "Solo trips aren't so bad, you know?" She is very competent at her job, but she always seemed a bit distant, and we didn't have much of a private relationship. I was a bit surprised when she suddenly started talking to me. "A single life isn't bad either, huh? I'm actually divorced." She flashed a charming smile as she spoke. There was no trace of tragedy in her smile. Rather, it looked refreshing. "Really? I had no idea. You see me as someone fully dedicated to work, right? In the past, I was desperately trying to become the perfect wife. I kept pushing myself beyond my limits, constantly restraining myself. I didn't know she had such a past. Until now, I thought I was only interested in work, and she always seemed perfect in my eyes. I was pushing myself too hard. At that time, a bunch of my colleagues got married and quit their jobs all at once, and I guess I was in a rush to get married too. I felt the same way," I found myself saying naturally. "When I save up some money, I go on solo trips. You know, being alone can be quite nice." "Is that so? Why don't you try it once you've saved up some money? Of course, I wouldn't mind accompanying you." I couldn't help but smile at her words, and before I knew it, we were both laughing. I realized I might have been shackled by society's expectations of happiness. I want to become a free spirit like her, not bound by anything. What is my happiness? Is it working? Or maybe having hobbies? Maybe I might find a true life partner. Someone who isn't my ex-husband. In any case, I have plenty of time